Here we keep you entertained by our folk tales and true life stories. Please subscribe to our channel as it means the world to us. Also, please like, share, and comment on this channel for more exclusive contents. Now sit back and relax as we take you through the most wonderful epistle. The rain had not stopped for hours. Cold droplets sliced through the wind, painting the sidewalks in a murky sheen of gray, and turning every step into a careful calculation against slipping. At the corner of West Grand Boulevard, under a rusted green shelter, stood Sophia Roberts, wrapped in a faded burgundy scarf, her janitor uniform soaked at the hems. She'd just finished cleaning the floors at Metro General, where the smell of disinfectants clung to her skin more stubbornly than any perfume. Her face was tired, but her eyes held that quiet fire, familiar to anyone who'd ever had to fight for everything they had. Across the bus stop, seated on the bench with a duffel bag at his feet and a cardboard cup of gas station coffee, was a man who looked like defeat had sat on his chest for years. He had the build of someone who once played football, but now wore a hooded jacket 2 sizes too big and shoes that talked when he walked. She noticed his fingers shaking, maybe from the cold, or from something deeper. He was Elijah Brooks, a former junior league athlete whose shot at the NFL was shattered 2 years ago by a knee injury during tryouts. A torn ACL and a crooked sports agent later, he'd found himself dropped by recruiters and forgotten by everyone who once cheered him on. His savings had dried up after one too many surgeries, and pride had kept him from moving back in with his mother, Bernice, a retired lunchroom assistant who'd raised him on a strict diet of rules, religion, and resilience. He didn't like going back there, it reminded him of failure. So instead, he hopped shelters, applied for jobs he was either overqualified or underqualified for, and sat at bus stops like this, pretending he had somewhere to go. When Sophia offered him a half-smile as their eyes met, it startled him. People didn't smile at him these days, not unless they wanted something. But there was something in her gaze that wasn't pity. It was recognition. The kind only shared between those who've swallowed shame and kept standing. Sophia hadn't spoken to her estranged father in 5 years, not since he told her she'd become her mother, a martyr in overalls. Retired from the Marines, Harold Roberts had never understood why his daughter scrubbed bathrooms instead of chasing bigger dreams. But dreams didn't pay rent, and with a younger brother like Darren, who drank every opportunity he was given, Sophia had learned to become the backbone no one asked for but always leaned on. As she stood beside Elijah in the rain, watching the neon lights from a passing bus reflect in the puddles at their feet, she saw in him a man who was still fighting invisible battles. She didn't ask his name. She didn't offer her own. But when she reached into her lunch bag and quietly handed him a sealed peanut butter sandwich wrapped in cling film, Elijah blinked once, stunned. No words. Just acceptance. That small act, so simple, so human, planted the first seed of something neither of them could name yet. Not love. Not fate. Just understanding. Long before Sophia stood at that bus stop sharing a sandwich with a stranger, her life was already a tapestry of bruised sacrifices and broken beginnings. At 17, she had planned to study geriatric care. She loved older people, their stories, their wisdom, but that dream evaporated the day her mother's back injury worsened, leaving Sophia to pick up cleaning jobs to keep the lights on. Darren, her younger brother, was supposed to help, but he fell in love with the bottle faster than he did with responsibility. Their father, Harold, had remarried and moved to Florida after retiring from the Marines, choosing peace over parenting. Sophia cleaned motel bathrooms during the day and mopped hospital floors at night, her hands raw from bleach and stress. Every dollar was stretched until it groaned. Yet despite the daily grind, there remained in her heart a stubborn ember, quiet, glowing, waiting for something, anything, to breathe it back to flame. Elijah's backstory was a different kind of heartbreak, loud, televised, and still echoing in his ears. At 22, he was on the cover of Midwestern Sports Weekly, hailed as the future of football, with scouts whispering about endorsements and draft possibilities. But one misstep during a scrimmage changed everything. The sickening snap of his ACL haunted him more than the pain. It was the silence that came after, the agents who stopped calling, the coach who said, maybe next season, and the girls who once threw themselves at him now crossing streets to avoid him. With no degree, no backup plan, and no family safety net beyond his religious, no-nonsense mother, Elijah drifted from city to city chasing construction gigs, fitness training gigs, anything. But nothing stuck. His pride kept him from panhandling, but hunger taught him humility. His body ached from sleeping in cars and shelters, but the real wound was the one in his spirit. He felt like a ghost of the man he was meant to be. Their lives should never have intersected. Sophia, the caretaker who never stopped giving, and Elijah, the fallen athlete who had nothing left to offer. And yet, they did. A week after the sandwich exchange, they ran into each other again, this time at a downtown soup kitchen. Sophia was volunteering, ladling stew into styrofoam bowls, when she saw him at the back of the line, head low, eyes hollow. Something pulled at her. Maybe it was the memory of that day in the rain, or maybe it was her own unspoken loneliness. She slipped him 2 extra rolls and a bottle of water. He muttered thank you without lifting his gaze, and she simply smiled and said, "You look like someone who used to believe in himself." It was a statement that clung to Elijah for hours afterward, long after the stew had settled in his stomach. He didn't know it yet, but those words would become the rope he'd start to climb out of his pit. The third time they met was entirely by accident, or perhaps it was the universe being poetic in its design. Sophia had just finished a 10-hour shift cleaning the floors at Ridgecrest Inn and was dragging herself to the 24-hour corner mart for a packet of instant noodles and some sorely needed silence. Her world was a loop of repetition: mop, scrub, disinfect, repeat. But that evening, as she passed a small alley behind the store, she heard someone cursing under their breath. When she turned, she saw him, Elijah, kneeling beside his duffel bag, trying to tape together the sole of his busted sneaker. It was the first time she noticed how far he'd fallen. His eyes looked bruised from lack of sleep, his clothes layered against the cold, and his once athletic frame now hollowed by hunger. She said nothing at first. Then, after a beat, she held up her grocery bag and asked, "You like chicken-flavored ramen?" They sat together on a cracked stone bench just outside her shared studio apartment building, their legs barely brushing, the cold steam of their breaths mixing with the curling warmth from 2 cups of instant noodles. Elijah devoured the food with a quiet desperation that almost made her cry, but she bit back the lump in her throat. It wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. Between slurps, he began to talk. He didn't know why he opened up, but once he started, he couldn't stop. He told her about his football dreams, the agent who ghosted him, the day he watched his name get passed over in the draft, and the slow, humiliating descent from a stadium spotlight to sleeping in his car near gas stations. Sophia listened, really listened, the way people rarely do. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. And when he asked about her story, she gave it in pieces, about her mom dying of lupus, her brother Darren stealing money from her purse more times than she could count, and her father's final words before he walked out, "You'll drown trying to save everyone." There was no romance that night. No touches beyond the gentle pass of a napkin. But what formed between them was far stronger than infatuation. It was resilience forged in shared scars. Elijah walked her to her building's door, hands in his pockets, head bowed like a schoolboy. Just before he left, she turned and asked, "Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" He hesitated, then lied. "Yeah, I'm good." But she saw the lie in his eyes. She didn't push it. Instead, she told him, "Come back here tomorrow night if you're hungry. I'll make the noodles fancy next time, might even throw in an egg." He laughed, a deep, surprised laugh that seemed to shock even him. As she went inside, Sophia leaned against the door for a long moment. Something about this man haunted her, not in a dangerous way, but in the way you know someone's fall wasn't their fault. And that maybe, just maybe, helping him might save them both. The building stood tall like a glass monolith, casting sharp reflections of the morning sun onto the bustling Detroit street below. Sophia had mopped that lobby dozens of times, polished its brass fixtures, wiped fingerprints off the revolving doors, even smiled politely at suits who never acknowledged her. But today, she noticed someone sitting on the edge of the marble fountain inside, nervously tapping his knee, Elijah. Dressed in an ill-fitting navy suit with fraying cuffs and a borrowed tie, he looked completely out of place amidst the sleek, sharp professionalism of the corporate world. She ducked behind a potted ficus, not out of fear, but instinct. She watched him rise when a receptionist called his name. His shoulders squared, but she could tell from his shifting eyes and clenched fists that he was already preparing to fail. Something about it broke her. She wasn't supposed to be here this morning. She was covering for a sick colleague, but maybe fate had put her in this exact moment for a reason. 20 minutes later, she spotted him again, this time in the building's rear alley, slumped against the brick wall, tie undone, expression hollow. "They said I didn't have the qualifications," he muttered when she approached. "Didn't even let me finish explaining what I could do." Sophia glanced at the gold plaque on the office door she had just cleaned, Cohen Associates Regional Investment Group. Mr. Benjamin Cohen was the head of HR, a man Sophia once helped when he collapsed in the elevator from a diabetic episode. She'd called 911, stayed by his side, and even helped administer his insulin when the paramedics were delayed. He never forgot that. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. With one text and a bold message, "I know a man who deserves a chance more than anyone," she took a risk. Minutes later, Cohen himself came down. Elijah was stunned when the suited executive shook his hand, looked him in the eye, and said, "I hear you're better than your resume. Come prove it." Elijah never knew what Sophia had done. He assumed Cohen had overheard the interview or perhaps felt guilty for dismissing him too fast. Either way, he was offered a temporary assistant role in logistics, just enough to prove himself. For Sophia, watching him walk back into that building felt like witnessing the first step of a long climb. She didn't expect a thank you. She didn't even tell him she was behind it. That night, when they met again at her doorstep, Elijah wore a rare look of pride. "I got the job," he said with a breathless grin. She celebrated with microwave pizza and off-brand soda, both laughing too loudly over something trivial. But deep inside, Sophia's heart beat with cautious hope. Not just for Elijah's future, but for her own decision to believe in someone again. She had no idea that the same act of kindness that lifted him up would one day be the weapon he used to cut her down. The first snow of the season dusted the streets like powdered sugar, transforming the grimy sidewalks into something briefly magical. Sophia stood outside the neighborhood soup kitchen, wrapped in a faded parka, her cheeks flushed from both the cold and the laughter that Elijah's jokes provoked. Ever since he started working at Cohen Associates, he'd begun showing up more regularly to volunteer in the evenings, something Sophia did out of habit and heart, and something Elijah had never done before. But being there beside her, serving hot chili to men and women who reminded him of where he'd just escaped from, shifted something in him. There was humility in washing trays and wiping tables, and pride in offering dignity to others. That night, as they finished stacking chairs and mopping the last patch of floor, Elijah leaned against the doorframe, watching her as if seeing her for the first time. And in that quiet moment, it happened, their first kiss. No words. No awkward build-up. Just snow falling gently between them, and lips that met like they were always meant to. It wasn't fireworks or movie scene perfection, it was trembling and unsure, a collision of gratitude, relief, and longing. When they pulled away, both breathless and a little stunned, Sophia looked down, avoiding his gaze. "Was that," she started, but Elijah nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Yeah," he whispered, "I think it was something." That night, they walked home in silence, shoulders brushing occasionally, each step echoing 1,000 unspoken emotions. Sophia had been careful with her heart, especially after the nightmare that was her past engagement to Malcolm, a smooth-talking scammer who drained her savings and left her cold. But Elijah was different. He didn't promise the world, he offered something rarer, presence. Still, a whisper of fear clung to her. Was this just the high of change, or could something real grow from shared struggle? At her door, he kissed her forehead and walked away. She didn't stop him. Some things, she believed, needed time to bloom. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, Tasha sat curled on her couch, clutching her phone and kicking her feet like a teenager. She had just exchanged numbers with Marcus, the delivery driver who'd accidentally spilled a crate of canned beans on her 2 days earlier at the shelter's donation dock. Their awkward meet-cute had turned into back-and-forth banter that made her cheeks hurt from grinning. Marcus was charming, with a boyish grin and an eagerness that disarmed even Tasha's usual sass. But what she didn't know, what Marcus hadn't told her, was that he had a record. A sealed juvenile offense for credit card fraud he never quite escaped, and a current hustle involving rerouted packages and under-the-table deliveries. He wanted to be better. He thought maybe Tasha could be the start of that change. But secrets have weight, and his was growing heavier by the day. Just as Sophia and Elijah's spark began to flicker in the snow, somewhere else, shadows started gathering, and the storm ahead would spare no one. The apartment was nothing special, just a second-floor walk-up with creaky floors, mismatched tiles, and a heater that hissed like an old man with a grudge. But for Elijah and Sophia, it was a palace. The first night they moved in together, they sat on the floor, eating takeout off a stack of unopened boxes, laughing over a broken fork and a spilled soda. It was the kind of laughter that comes not from jokes, but from sheer exhaustion and shared survival. They furnished the place bit by bit. Sophia found a second-hand couch through Tasha's cousin. Elijah picked up a battered dresser from a curb on his way home. Together, they painted the walls a warm cream, stuck discount star-shaped decals on the ceiling, and created a world that was their own. The space wasn't perfect, but it was filled with something that mattered more than polish or price: effort. Every stain, every creak, was part of their beginning. But under the joy, a silent tension began to form like condensation on glass, barely visible but definitely there. Elijah had landed a full-time contract with Cohen Associates, thanks to his relentless work ethic and ability to think on his feet. His job involved scheduling shipments and managing inventory for regional clients. It paid better than anything he'd ever earned, and for the first time in years, he wasn't worried about his next meal. Still, it bothered him that Sophia was making more. She'd quietly picked up an extra cleaning gig at a private school to make ends meet. She never lorded it over him, never made him feel less, but the pride that once drove Elijah on the football field began to twist into something darker. He told himself he'd contribute more soon, but deep down, a seed of resentment was forming. How could he be the man in the house when she was always 2 steps ahead? The more grateful he tried to be, the more trapped he began to feel. One chilly evening, while folding laundry, Elijah finally let it slip. "I just wish I wasn't always the one being helped," he muttered, tossing a pair of socks into the wrong drawer. Sophia, kneeling by the hamper, froze. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Forget I said it." But she didn't forget. That night, lying beside him in their lopsided bed, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if their foundation, so freshly built, already had cracks. She didn't blame him. She knew what masculinity did to men, how the world taught them that needing a woman made them weak. But still, it hurt. She had hoped their bond was deeper than societal ego. And while Elijah lay sleeping, dreaming of success and recognition, Sophia stared into the dark, praying that their love wouldn't buckle under the weight of unspoken insecurity. Neither of them knew yet, this was just the beginning of what would slowly, silently start to fracture. It started with a phone call Sophia overheard while scrubbing the kitchen sink. Elijah's voice was softer than usual, laced with a strange mixture of guilt and anticipation. "Yeah, Ma. Tomorrow's fine. Just keep it low-key, okay?" That one word, "Ma," triggered a pulse of anxiety in Sophia's chest. She had heard bits and pieces about Bernice Brooks, Elijah's mother, strict, deeply religious, and a woman who had survived a lifetime of disappointment with a spine made of steel. Sophia wasn't nervous about meeting her, she was terrified. The last time she'd met a man's mother, it ended with insults about her being just a cleaner with no real ambition. But this time, she was determined to make it work. She spent the evening prepping a simple dinner of rice, baked chicken, and sweet corn, humble but hearty. When Bernice arrived the next day, wrapped in a thick church shawl and holding a store-bought pound cake, the air in the room shifted. Her eyes scanned the apartment like a customs officer, missing nothing. Bernice sat at the dinner table with her spine perfectly straight, her purse clutched tightly on her lap as if she feared the furniture might steal it. She barely touched her food, only sipping warm tea Sophia had brewed especially for her. The small talk started benign, how long they'd been living together, what Elijah did at work, but gradually, her words grew sharp, polished with passive aggression. I remember when Elijah used to say he'd marry a teacher or a nurse, she mused aloud. Not that there's anything wrong with sanitation jobs. But I suppose love sees past limitations. Sophia smiled tightly, her hand tightening around her fork. Elijah, who sat between them like a referee, kept sipping his drink and avoiding eye contact. Sophia works harder than anyone I know, he muttered. But Bernice was far from done. And is she still the one paying most of the bills? Or have you taken that burden yet, son? Her words stung worse because they weren't shouted, they were precise, cold cuts with surgical accuracy. And every jab left a bruise. After Bernice left, with barely a thank you and a warning about Sunday church services, Sophia stood at the sink, washing dishes in silence while Elijah fiddled with his phone. You're not going to say anything? She asked finally. He looked up, startled. About what? She turned, hands dripping, heart aching. She thinks I trapped you. Like I'm just waiting for a ring and a paycheck I didn't earn. Elijah sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She's just old-fashioned. Don't let it get to you. But it did. It got to Sophia because Elijah didn't defend her. Not really. Not the way someone who truly stood beside you should. That night, they slept back to back, a wall of silence growing between them. And for the first time since they met, Sophia questioned if love alone could withstand the weight of pride, perception, and the poisonous whispers of people who thought they knew what was best. Deep down, something in her spirit whispered that this visit was the first tremor before a coming quake. 2 weeks after Bernice's frosty visit, Elijah came home earlier than usual, his tie loosened, his cheeks flushed with excitement, and a strange spark in his eyes that Sophia hadn't seen in months. I got promoted, he said breathlessly, dropping his duffel bag on the couch like it no longer mattered. Operations supervisor. Full-time. Better hours. Actual benefits. Sophia blinked, stunned, a wooden spoon still in her hand from stirring stew. Then she laughed, a loud, joyful sound that echoed off the apartment walls. She rushed into his arms, the kind of embrace that folded joy and pride and relief into one unspoken expression. What Elijah didn't know, what he never asked, was how his name got on the short list. Sophia had spoken again with Mr. Cohen, gently reminding him of Elijah's consistent dedication, and subtly nudging the idea that leadership needed men who'd risen from the trenches. It wasn't manipulation. It was advocacy. But she never told Elijah. She wanted his win to feel purely his own. That night, they celebrated with takeout from a Nigerian restaurant Elijah had passed for weeks but never dared enter. Sophia danced in the living room with plantain in one hand and a soft drink in the other, while Elijah watched her with a strange expression, part admiration, part discomfort. He loved her joy, but he didn't like how it made him feel small. She was still working long hours, still paying more rent, still somehow holding them both together. And now that he had a higher title and steadier income, he believed he should be the one holding the reins. But quietly, without telling her, he'd already started spending beyond their means. Lunches with senior staff. New cologne. Drinks after hours to network. And worse, he'd begun visiting underground betting lounges with coworkers who treated gambling like a shortcut to glory. At first, it was small. Then he started losing. And when he lost, he borrowed. Sophia didn't know. She was too busy buying him a new briefcase and pressing his shirts for work, believing they were rising together. Later that week, she stood by their narrow kitchen counter, palms trembling as she held the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines stared back at her, loud, impossible, undeniable. Her knees buckled to the floor, not from fear, but from overwhelming emotion. A baby. Their baby. A new life conceived in hardship and love. She waited until Elijah returned home before blurting it out, unsure of how he'd react. At first, his eyes widened, then his lips curled into a tired smile, as if he'd been waiting for some kind of anchor to fix his floating self. "We're going to be parents," he whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he held her close. Sophia felt the weight of purpose settle on her chest, believing that maybe, just maybe, their family was the missing piece. But she didn't see the silent storm brewing behind Elijah's eyes. He was happy, yes. But he was also drowning. And he had no idea how to tell her that part. The grocery store was crowded that afternoon, the kind of crowd that made Sophia shift uncomfortably and hug her belly a little tighter. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing with maternal grace yet weighed down by fatigue. Elijah had promised to pick her up after work, but as the minutes ticked by, she realized he wasn't coming. Again. Her back ached. Her ankles throbbed. Still, she forced herself to finish shopping, gently maneuvering her cart down each aisle, checking prices like she always did, carefully and with quiet precision. Just as she reached for a can of tomato paste, a sharp pain shot through her lower back, wrapping around her abdomen like a steel band. The can slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor, echoing louder than it should have. Her water broke right there between the soup shelf and the crackers, and panic rippled through her like electricity. Customers stared. Someone shouted. And Sophia, trying to breathe through the pain, whispered, "Please, not now." Tasha arrived at the hospital breathless, her jacket half-zipped and her face lined with worry. She'd been at home when Sophia called, voice shaking, pain in her throat more than her belly. "Elijah's not answering," Sophia had said between gasps. Tasha didn't ask questions. She just ran. She got Sophia to the emergency room just in time for the nurses to wheel her into labor and delivery. Meanwhile, Elijah sat 3 miles away in a smoky lounge downtown, beer in hand, laughing too loud at a joke he barely understood. He'd silenced his phone earlier after losing another $300 at the roulette table and hadn't bothered to check it. When he finally did, sometime past midnight, he blinked at the missed calls, Tasha, 4, Sophia, 6, and one from a number he didn't recognize. His stomach dropped. The air in his lungs vanished. He ran out into the cold night, hailed a cab, and tried to make it back before it was too late. But the damage had already begun to carve its mark. When he rushed into the hospital room, Sophia was pale and exhausted, holding their swaddled son with a mix of awe and silent betrayal. Her face softened when she saw Elijah, but her eyes were wet, not from hormones or pain, but from disappointment. "You weren't there," she whispered. He stammered an apology, fumbling over excuses about bad reception and work delays, but Sophia just shook her head. "I needed you." The baby squirmed in her arms, oblivious to the fracture forming between his parents. Elijah held the boy briefly, his hands shaking, his heart full yet heavy. He smiled, told Sophia he loved her, and kissed her forehead. But she said nothing. That silence was louder than any scream. It wasn't anger that scared Elijah, it was the way she'd gone quiet. He thought it would pass, like all storms do. What he didn't realize was that some storms don't end. Some just teach you how much you took the sunlight for granted. The days that followed the birth of their son, whom they named Ezra, were a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and interrupted sleep. Sophia took to motherhood like instinct, every cry decoded, every bottle warmed with a gentle steadiness that amazed even the nurses during their brief hospital stay. Elijah, however, struggled. He had always imagined fatherhood as something noble, something cinematic, teaching a boy to ride a bike, tossing a football in the yard. But the reality was raw, 3 a.m. diaper blowouts, milk-stained shirts, and a crying infant who didn't respond to logic or pleading. He found excuses to leave the house, claiming errands or work emergencies, just to escape the suffocating repetition. Sophia noticed, of course. She always noticed. She tried not to say anything, hoping he'd adjust with time. But the longer he avoided bonding with Ezra, the more alone she began to feel, like she was raising 2 children instead of 1. Sophia's days bled into each other, laundry, feeding, cleaning, pumping, repeat. Still, she found joy in Ezra's giggles, and the way his tiny fingers curled around hers, and the rhythm of their new life. But Elijah became increasingly irritable, snapping over the smallest things. If Ezra cried too long, he'd roll his eyes and retreat into the other room. If Sophia asked for help, he'd sigh as if she were burdening him with a favor. "You act like I'm useless," he muttered once during a late-night argument. "I work, don't I? What else do you want?" Sophia had stared at him, heartbroken, wondering how the same man who once kissed her forehead in a snowstorm now acted like being a present father was optional. She didn't respond. Words felt pointless. And though they shared the same apartment, the same child, the same bed, a widening silence grew between them, one neither knew how to cross. Meanwhile, at Elijah's workplace, a new temp named Erica had joined the logistics department. She was sharp-tongued, always dressed immaculately, and carried a flirtatious energy that lingered in every glance she gave Elijah. It started innocently, quick jokes in the break room, shared frustrations about office bureaucracy, casual mentions of her gym routines. Elijah, craving validation he no longer felt at home, basked in the attention. He didn't flirt back, not yet, but he also didn't stop her. It felt good to be seen again, to be admired instead of needed. Sophia, busy nursing Ezra and stretching every dollar, had no idea that temptation had entered her husband's orbit. She still believed they were in this together, still believed the cracks in their foundation could be repaired. But what she didn't know was that some men, when handed love, don't know how to hold it, they only know how to run from its weight. The scent was the first thing Sophia noticed, a faint trail of expensive perfume clinging to Elijah's coat, mixed with cigarette smoke that neither of them used to tolerate. He came home late again, long after Ezra had drifted to sleep on her chest. The apartment was dim except for the warm glow of the nightlight beside the crib. Sophia didn't ask where he had been. Not immediately. She just watched him from the kitchen, her hand scrubbing a bottle out of muscle memory, her thoughts spinning in quiet dread. Elijah avoided her gaze, muttering something about a work dinner, and slipped into the bathroom without another word. Moments later, she heard the water run. She stood there, still, breathing in the silence that used to feel comfortable and now felt suffocating. She remembered when the nights were filled with soft laughter and whispered dreams. Now they were just marked by footsteps, locked doors, and lies too tired to hide. That Friday, something in her broke. She waited outside the logistics warehouse where Elijah worked, holding Ezra bundled in a thick blanket. She'd told herself she wasn't going to confront anything, just surprise him with lunch, something kind. But after 20 minutes of standing in the cold, she saw him exit through the side door with Erica. They were laughing, too closely, too comfortably. Erica reached up to fix his collar, fingers brushing his chest like it was casual. Sophia didn't make a sound. She simply turned and walked away. She didn't need a kiss or a confession. That single moment said everything. That night, Elijah came home smelling of alcohol and stale smoke. Sophia didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You're drifting, Elijah." He scoffed, eyes bleary. "You're imagining things, Sophia. You've become dull. Always about the baby. Always tired." The words slapped harder than any insult he'd ever spoken. And when he fell asleep minutes later, unbothered, Sophia sat in the living room rocking Ezra, realizing she was mourning a man who was still breathing beside her. Meanwhile, Tasha, sensing Sophia's unraveling, began to ask deeper questions about Marcus. He had been evasive lately, skipping meetups, brushing off her concerns with charm. But something in her gut told her there was more. That same weekend, she secretly followed his delivery van after he said he had a late-night run. She watched as he exchanged 2 boxes with a man behind a pawn shop, the interaction too fast, too nervous. She didn't confront him, yet. But the betrayal sat like ice in her belly. Back at home, Sophia had drifted into a dangerous quiet. She moved through the days like a ghost, smiling at Ezra, folding Elijah's clothes, cleaning, cooking, all while building a wall of steel around her heart. And Elijah, too distracted by ego and Erica's attention, didn't notice he was losing the very woman who once believed in him when no one else would. The question wasn't if he would fall. The question was, how loud would the crash be when he did? It wasn't one moment that confirmed it. It was hundreds of little things that added up like puzzle pieces forming an ugly truth. Elijah had changed, not just in routine but in energy. He no longer touched Sophia gently, no longer asked about her day, no longer paused to watch Ezra giggle in his sleep. His phone was always face down, and every time it buzzed, he stiffened like a child with something to hide. Sophia never wanted to be that woman, the one who searched phones, who stalked her own husband through digital shadows, but one night, when Elijah fell asleep on the couch, snoring and reeking of whiskey, her hand moved before her heart could stop it. The password hadn't changed. She opened his messages and her eyes found the name Eric T. Her fingers froze. She clicked. What followed were flirtatious texts, secret lunch plans, and even a hotel confirmation that made her stomach churn. Eric T was Erica. Of course it was. She didn't scream. She didn't wake him up or throw the phone at his head. Instead, she tiptoed into Ezra's room, sat by the crib, and wept silently into her sleeve. Her soul felt fractured, not just from the betrayal, but from the insult of being discarded so casually after everything she had sacrificed. She thought of the jobs she worked to keep their lights on, the promotions she helped him earn without taking credit, the nights she went without sleep so he could rest. And now, he was trading it all in for the illusion of a new thrill, the shallow attention of a woman who didn't know the weight of who he used to be. But what hurt most wasn't the cheating. It was the cowardice. He hadn't even told her. He'd let her fall deeper in love with a lie, smiling over dinner while secretly planning weekend rendezvous behind her back. Sophia wasn't just heartbroken. She was quietly furious, and that kind of fury had depth, a slow burn that didn't end in screams, but in silence and strategy. Across town, Tasha was unraveling her own storm. Marcus had started acting distant, making excuses, declining her calls with vague apologies. Still reeling from what she saw behind the pawn shop, she finally confronted him outside his apartment. "What are you hiding, Marcus?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. He hesitated, then sighed. "I'm in debt, Tasha. I started rerouting packages. Selling to collectors on the side. I didn't want to drag you into it." Tasha's jaw clenched. "You already did." Their trust cracked that night, just as Sophia's had. But while Tasha stormed off, determined never to be deceived again, Sophia made a different choice. She stayed quiet. Not because she was weak, but because she was planning. Sometimes, a woman's intuition doesn't just reveal truth. It reveals timing. And Sophia knew hers was coming. She just had to wait for the right moment, to strike, to leave, or to rise. Whatever she chose, she would not be the one left broken. The event was supposed to be a celebration, Cohen Associates annual gala for senior staff and their families. Held at a 5-star hotel downtown, the venue sparkled with chandeliers, champagne fountains, and slow jazz from a live band tucked into the corner of the ballroom. Sophia hadn't wanted to go. She hadn't even been invited. But the night before, Elijah came home with a forced smile and a dress bag he claimed Erica picked out just for fun. The insult stung, but Sophia wore the dress anyway, sleek black with silver accents, and forced herself to show up. She knew something was coming. Her instincts screamed it. But nothing prepared her for what he said during the toast. Glass raised, laughter in the air, Elijah leaned into the mic with drunken charm and slurred, "To my wife, Sophia. The woman I married. Out of sympathy. I mean, come on, she was a commiseration case, right?" The room fell into stunned silence. And then, cruel laughter followed. Sophia sat frozen. Not even her worst nightmares had crafted this moment. The man she loved, who once cried in her arms, who she helped rise from nothing, had reduced her to a joke in a room full of strangers and colleagues. Every word hit her like glass shards to the chest. Mr. Cohen, standing near the bar, turned sharply toward Elijah, his expression a storm of disbelief and disgust. Erica looked both embarrassed and amused, pretending not to know what came next. Elijah, flushed with alcohol and misplaced pride, didn't even register Sophia's pain until she rose from her seat without a word, picked up her clutch, and calmly walked out of the ballroom. No tears. No scene. Just quiet dignity. She passed people whispering, their eyes downcast with pity or awkward curiosity. And still, she said nothing. But something in her broke, fully, irreparably. The weight of every sacrifice she had made now hung like a noose around her soul, and all she could think was, he said it. Out loud. Outside, Detroit's cold night wrapped around her like a slap. She didn't call Tasha. She didn't hail a cab. She walked, heels clicking against the pavement, until the sting in her chest eased into a dull, determined ache. Sophia knew now what she hadn't dared admit before. Elijah wasn't just lost, he had chosen this. Chosen to disrespect her. Chosen ego, attention, and another woman over the one who held him up when no one else would. What he didn't know was that Mr. Cohen had overheard every word. And in the coming days, his career, built on Sophia's quiet behind-the-scenes support, would begin to crumble. But Sophia wasn't thinking about revenge yet. Not fully. Right now, she was thinking of Ezra. Of the life she wanted to build free from betrayal. And as she disappeared into the night, her steps grew steadier. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Elijah had humiliated her in public. But he'd just given her the permission she needed to finally walk away. The apartment felt colder when Sophia returned. Not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Elijah was already home, sprawled on the couch with his tie undone and the TV volume too loud, a bottle of whiskey on the table, half gone. He didn't even look up when she walked in. No apology. No shame. Just a dismissive glance, like the public humiliation hadn't happened. Sophia didn't say a word. She moved past him silently, went into Ezra's room, and sat by the crib, watching her baby sleep, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, completely unaware of the storm that had just cracked their world open. She tucked the blanket tighter around him and stared at the painted stars on the ceiling, the same ones she and Elijah had placed months ago with laughter and love. Now, they felt like reminders of lies. The tension in the apartment was unbearable, suffocating. Every breath she took felt like she was inhaling the ashes of trust. The next day, Elijah tried to act like nothing had happened. He offered her coffee. Commented on the weather. Played peekaboo with Ezra as if the night before had been a dream. But Sophia wasn't playing along. When she confronted him, calmly, directly, he scoffed, called her too sensitive, and insisted the toast had been a joke. You know I didn't mean it like that, he shrugged, refusing to look her in the eye. But Sophia wasn't looking for remorse, she was looking for accountability. And it never came. Later that evening, as Ezra cried from his crib, Elijah stormed into the nursery after a minor disagreement, grumbling that he couldn't think with all the damn noise. When Sophia tried to calm both her son and her husband, Elijah lost it. In a fit of rage, he kicked the side of the crib, splintering one of its wooden rails. The sudden crash made Ezra wail harder. Sophia scooped him into her arms and shielded him, her body shaking, not from fear, but from realization. This wasn't just a failing relationship. It was a danger zone. She didn't wait until morning. She packed Ezra's things in silence, heart pounding, every sound echoing louder than normal. She texted Tasha, who arrived within 20 minutes with wide eyes and open arms. Sophia didn't explain much, she didn't have to. One look at the cracked crib was enough. I can't let Ezra grow up thinking this is normal, she whispered, buckling her baby into the car seat. Tasha nodded. You shouldn't have to, she replied. Elijah didn't try to stop them. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring at the broken crib like it was some unimportant furniture piece and not the symbol of everything he had shattered. As the car pulled away from the apartment, Sophia exhaled the breath she'd been holding for months. This wasn't just an escape, it was a beginning. She didn't have a plan yet. But what she had now was her son, her dignity, and a clear vision. Never again would she settle for survival when she deserved peace. Elijah's descent was slow, almost invisible at first, like a leak behind a wall, unnoticed until everything crumbled. After Sophia left with Ezra, the apartment became a hollow shell of regret. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink. Takeout containers lined the counter. The silence he once craved now mocked him. But it wasn't just his home life unraveling, his professional world was already bleeding. Mr. Cohen had called him in for a performance review, but the tension in the room said more than the words did. An anonymous complaint had been submitted about unethical behavior, misuse of company funds, and suspicious vendor interactions. Elijah tried to defend himself, but Cohen's tone was ice. "You were given everything," he said sharply. "But your ego burned the bridge before anyone could even cross it." The company froze his access pending investigation. His badge no longer worked. And just like that, the office that once lifted him became the one that buried him. Erica was gone before the dust even settled. 1 week after the gala disaster, and 2 days after his suspension, she stopped returning his calls. Elijah went to her apartment, flowers in hand, desperation in his throat, but another man answered the door. "She moved out," the stranger said, uninterested in his confusion. Left with no one and nothing, Elijah spiraled. He started gambling again, harder, faster, chasing the high of control, but losing more than just money. The men he owed were no longer friendly. One cornered him outside a liquor store, shoving him against a wall with a warning laced in venom, "You've got 3 days." His bank account was empty, and his name, once praised in company emails, was now whispered like a cautionary tale. Elijah sat alone in the dark that night, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, unshaved, unfocused, and finally forced to face the damage he'd done. At the same time, Tasha was reeling from her own heartbreak. Marcus had been arrested in a citywide sting for package rerouting and fraudulent deliveries. The news hit her like a sucker punch. For weeks, he'd played the role of the reformed man, charming, supportive, attentive. But beneath the surface was a hustle he never let her see. Sophia sat with her on the floor of her new housing unit, holding Ezra with one arm and wrapping the other around her friend. "We keep picking men who need fixing," Tasha whispered through tears. Sophia nodded slowly. "Maybe because no one ever taught us we could choose men who were already whole." That night, both women sat in silence, two mothers navigating the aftermath of misplaced love and fractured trust. But unlike Elijah and Marcus, they had something real, resilience. And while the men who betrayed them were unraveling, Sophia and Tasha were quietly building, one choice, one breath, one unbroken promise at a time. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked beneath a flyer on the doormat of Tasha's apartment. Sophia almost threw it away, mistaking it for junk mail, but the handwriting stopped her, strong, familiar, unmistakably military. It was from Harold Roberts, her estranged father. "Heard you left," it read. "Heard he broke you. I was wrong to walk away. If you're willing, let me see you. Let me fix what I didn't fight for." The words hit Sophia harder than she expected. Her father had vanished after her mother died, retreating to a small cabin in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, unreachable and unreadable. But now, with Elijah gone and everything she once clung to shattered, part of her needed something steady, even if it came from someone who once abandoned her. Days later, with Ezra strapped in the back seat and Tasha watching silently from the porch, Sophia made the 5-hour drive north, heart trembling, unsure if this journey was about forgiveness or closure. The cabin was modest but warm, nestled between fir trees and surrounded by snow-kissed earth. When Harold opened the door, he looked smaller than she remembered, older, softer, with the tired eyes of a man who had lived with ghosts too long. He didn't try to hug her. Instead, he stepped aside and said, "You look like your mother when you're angry." That made her laugh, unexpectedly. Over the next 2 days, they talked, slowly at first, then freely. He confessed that his grief had made him cowardly, that watching Sophia become her mother in strength and sacrifice scared him because he knew what it had cost her mom. You needed a father, and I gave you a folded flag, he said, voice cracking. Sophia didn't forgive him overnight, but something shifted. A bridge was being rebuilt, plank by plank. Before she left, Harold pressed a check into her hand. His life savings. Start something. Anything. But make it yours. It was the first time anyone had truly invested in her, not out of guilt, but faith. Back home, Sophia sat in silence with the check, Ezra asleep beside her. The amount wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to finally stop reacting to life and start designing it. With Tasha's encouragement, she researched caregiver training programs. It wasn't just about employment, it was about legacy. She had spent years caring for others, always in the shadows, always invisible. Now, she wanted to step into a space where that care had power, value, and independence. She enrolled in a 6-month accelerated program for geriatric support specialists, diving headfirst into textbooks, hands-on training, and early morning study sessions while balancing motherhood and healing. It wasn't easy, but every sleepless night felt worth it. She was building something solid beneath her feet, something that couldn't be taken by a man's betrayal or a company's collapse. Sophia was no longer surviving. She was evolving. And she knew, without doubt, that the strongest thing a woman can do after heartbreak is not cry. It's rebuild. 6 months later, the certificate felt heavier than it looked, crisp, framed in dark walnut, with certified geriatric care specialist etched in gold at the top. Sophia stood in the small but bright living room of her new rental, Ezra sleeping in his crib, sunlight dancing on the walls. She had done it. While some days felt like dragging mountains with her bare hands, balancing diaper bags with textbooks, daycare runs with late-night quizzes, she hadn't quit. Her instructors called her the one with fire in her eyes. It was the same fire that had helped Elijah rise when he had nothing. But this time, she used it for herself. Soon after graduation, she applied to dozens of roles, nursing homes, rehab centers, and home care services. Most were polite rejections. Until one Tuesday morning, an email pinged, "We would love to meet you. Mr. Cohen speaks highly of your character." The sender? The Evergreen Recovery and Wellness Center. Sophia smiled for the first time in days, not just with her mouth, but with her soul. The Evergreen facility was nothing like the hospitals she used to clean. It was modern, peaceful, and filled with stories, not of sickness, but of healing. On her first tour, she walked past sunlit therapy rooms and art-filled halls, watching residents play board games, sing old gospel songs, and speak with a sense of dignity. Her interview panel was led by none other than Mr. Benjamin Cohen himself. He greeted her with warmth, apologizing for everything that had happened with Elijah, and made no attempt to hide his admiration. "You were the wind beneath a man who didn't even realize he was flying on borrowed strength," he said. "We'd be honored to have you lead our care team." And just like that, Sophia's new chapter began, not as a silent supporter, not as someone's afterthought, but as a leader. Her salary tripled what Elijah once earned. She moved into a better apartment, enrolled Ezra in a quality daycare, and finally began living, not just surviving, in her own name. Meanwhile, Elijah was sleeping on an old friend's couch in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled of old grease and broken promises. Jobless, broke, and ghosted by Erica, he spent his days scrolling through job boards and his nights wondering where it all went wrong. When he stumbled upon Sophia's face on the Evergreen website, smiling, holding a plaque, standing beside Mr. Cohen in a press release titled "From Cleaner to Care Leader, Sophia Roberts Inspires Us All," his heart sank. He clicked the article. Read every word. Watch the embedded video where she spoke briefly about dignity, motherhood, and reclaiming your worth. And for the first time, he realized the full weight of what he had lost, not just a partner, but a woman who had believed in him more than he had ever believed in himself. He picked up his cracked phone and opened her number, his finger hovering above the call button. But he didn't press it. Not yet. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew. She didn't need to hear from him. The knock came late, close to midnight, sharp and desperate against the front door of Sophia's new townhouse. Rain battered the windows in sheets, and thunder rolled like distant fury overhead. She stood frozen, Ezra asleep in the next room, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Another knock, louder. She opened the door slowly, half expecting trouble. But there he was, Elijah. Soaked to the bone, hoodie clinging to his frame, shoes squelching as he shifted from foot to foot. His eyes were hollow, bloodshot, and full of something she hadn't seen in years, raw humility. "I didn't know where else to go," he muttered. "I haven't seen my son." Sophia didn't say a word. She stepped aside without expression, not into the house, but onto the porch. They stood there, facing each other in the rain like forgotten strangers. It had only been a year since she left, but the gap between them felt like decades. "I'm not here to fight," Elijah said, voice cracking beneath the storm. I lost everything, Sophia. Erica, my job, my place. I messed up. You didn't deserve what I said, what I did. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." The rain didn't let up, it poured harder, as if heaven itself needed to drown out the silence between them. Sophia crossed her arms, not in anger, but to stop her heart from betraying her. She steadied him, not the man she once loved, but the broken remnant of him. "You lost me the day you called me a sympathy case," she finally said, her voice calm, unwavering. "But it wasn't what you said, it was how easy it was for you to say it. In front of everyone." Elijah wiped his face, whether from tears or rain she didn't know. "I thought I was better than you," he confessed. "And the truth is, I was never even close." That hurt more than she expected, to finally hear what she already knew. She didn't invite him inside. She offered him a towel and told him he could sleep in the garage for the night, only for Ezra's sake. No warmth, no reunion, just mercy. Elijah accepted without complaint, disappearing into the shadows with the towel pressed to his face. Back inside, Sophia leaned against the door, breathing heavily, emotions surging through her chest like a storm of their own. She hadn't cried in months, and she wouldn't tonight either. Her strength had grown roots too deep. Her survival had matured into stability. And as she peeked into Ezra's room, watching her son sleep peacefully, warm, safe, loved, she realized something profound. She didn't hate Elijah. She just outgrew him. He had been her lesson, not her destiny. And tomorrow, when the rain stopped, she would continue forward. Not with him. Never again with him. But stronger, wiser, and without regret. Because sometimes, the real win isn't proving them wrong, it's realizing you've moved on without even trying. The billboard went up without warning. A massive image stretched across the freeway exit near downtown Detroit, Evergreen Wellness, led by Sophia Roberts, certified geriatric care expert. Restoring dignity, one heart at a time. Elijah saw it from the backseat of a rideshare, stunned. His chest tightened as he read her name beneath the Evergreen logo. The same Sophia he'd once humiliated, now the face of one of the fastest-growing wellness centers in the state. It felt surreal. Days had passed since she let him stay in the garage. He hadn't seen her since. Every morning, she left before sunrise. Every evening, she returned long after Ezra had been tucked in. She never engaged, never lashed out. And yet, that silence weighed heavier than any punishment. He thought about the crib he shattered, the toast he slurred, the woman he belittled while she built his future behind the scenes. Now, she was building her own, without him in the blueprint. Inside Evergreen, Sophia walked through the halls with confidence in her steps and purpose in her voice. She led staff briefings, coached new hires, and held hands with aging residents who whispered stories only she had the patience to hear. Her office overlooked the courtyard, where residents planted flowers and shared laughter beneath the sun. Ezra's photo sat framed on her desk, beside a tiny paper flower he'd made at daycare. She had achieved what many told her was impossible, not just success, but peace. One afternoon, as she reviewed performance reports, her assistant entered with a handwritten letter. "From a visitor," she said, placing it on the desk. Sophia opened it slowly, her fingers steady. It was from Elijah. No begging. No apologies. Just acknowledgement. Thank you for what you gave me. You saved me once. I wasn't strong enough to deserve it. I see that now. She read the letter twice, her expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, she folded it and slipped it into a locked drawer. Elsewhere, Tasha stood outside a county jail facility, gripping Marcus's hand through the glass. He was thinner now, more reflective, remorse written across every syllable of his voice. I hurt you, he said. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'm proud of what you're doing. Tasha, now co-managing a local outreach group for women recovering from emotional betrayal, didn't reply with promises. She simply said, I grew. That's all I ever wanted, for both of us. That night, back at Sophia's place, the two women sat on the porch drinking tea as Ezra played with blocks beside them. There was no bitterness in their laughter, no longing in their words. Just fire-forged resilience. Sophia looked at the stars and said softly, funny how life works. You break, and you think that's the end. But really, it's the beginning of who you're meant to be. Tasha nodded, eyes glinting. We didn't just survive the fire, she whispered. We became something stronger because of it. The first day of kindergarten arrived with the quiet hum of August air and the gentle rustle of Ezra's backpack straps as he fidgeted in front of the mirror. Sophia knelt beside him, straightening his collar and smoothing his tiny afro with a loving palm. He grinned at her with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Will you be okay without me today, Mommy? He asked with wide, curious eyes. Sophia laughed softly, brushing a tear away before it could fall. I think I'll manage, she whispered, hugging him tight. Outside, the morning sun painted their front steps golden. As they walked hand in hand to the corner where the yellow school bus waited, Sophia's father sat in his wheelchair near the porch, waving proudly. The man who once vanished now showed up every week, faithfully and quietly, determined to earn the role of Grandpa back one gentle moment at a time. Sophia had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about choosing who you became in spite of it. Back at Evergreen, the walls of Sophia's office now held framed quotes from residents, photos of her growing team, and a new award from the city, Community Advocate of the Year. She'd come so far from mopping hospital floors and collecting rejected resumes. Her journey hadn't been a miracle, it had been a marathon. A slow, agonizing climb through betrayal, single motherhood, and reinvention. But what made it powerful wasn't the end result, it was the woman she'd had to become to earn it. Tasha entered the office mid-morning, holding a folder and a smile. The mayor's office wants you to lead the city's new wellness initiative, she said. Sophia blinked. I'm not a politician. Tasha shrugged. You're better. You're real. They laughed, their bond stronger than any paper contract. Together, they weren't just survivors of heartbreak, they were architects of their own destiny, living proof that women like them didn't need permission to thrive. They simply needed space, and now, they were creating it for others. Later that evening, Sophia sat in her living room, barefoot, sipping tea while Ezra played quietly with toy trains near the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass, but there was no sadness in it, only rhythm. Only peace. A box of old things sat unopened near the couch, Elijah's final letter, a pair of baby shoes, and the now irrelevant wedding band she once wore. She had planned to burn them. But instead, she tucked them into the closet as a sealed chapter, neither glorified nor mourned, just finished. A soft knock came at the door. It was Harold, holding 2 bowls of pepper soup. Dinner? He asked. Only if you made it, Sophia teased, letting him in. As the 3 of them sat at the table, 3 generations that almost never happened, Sophia looked around at the life she rebuilt. It wasn't perfect. But it was hers. And for the first time in years, she felt it, not hope, not pride, something quieter. Something stronger. Freedom. The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment, and also share to your loved ones or anyone who might be interested. Turn on post notification after subscribing so you get informed on our next video. Thank you, and I'd see you next time. Bye for now.